How well do you truly know yourself? Are you a great driver? A fantastic singer? A natural leader? Well, today we're going to explore the biases that distort the most important image of all, the one we have of ourselves. We'll find out why some people are blind to their own weaknesses, why experts struggle to teach beginners, and why we all fall for the vague flattery of horoscopes. It's time for a reality check. I'm Danny, and this is a new episode from English Plus Podcast. And today we have our third episode from our theme for this week, Understanding Cognitive Biases. And today we're going to talk about the biases of self-perception and abilities. And we're going to start with a short story of Tom's moment in the spotlight. That's coming next. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. The fluorescent lights of the office conference room usually hummed with the sound of quiet desperation and PowerPoint presentations. But tonight, they buzzed with a different energy. A makeshift stage stood where the quarterly budget was usually projected, and a microphone stood nervously in the center. It was the annual office talent show. A night of questionable magic tricks, awkward poetry, and a whole lot of brave, misguided enthusiasm. And no one was more enthusiastic than Tom. Tom, an accountant from the third floor, had signed up to sing. Not just to sing, but to perform. In his mind, his voice wasn't just pleasant, it was a powerful, undiscovered instrument. When he sang in the shower, the acoustics of the tiled walls seemed to agree, transforming his voice into something rich and resonant. He was completely convinced that his colleagues were about to discover the hidden star in their midst. During the afternoon rehearsal, he took to the stage. He'd chosen a big, dramatic ballad, a real mountain of a song. From the first note, it was clear to everyone in the room, except Tom, that this was a mountain he was not equipped to climb. The performance was a breathtaking spectacle of misplaced confidence. The notes were sharp, the key was a distant memory, and his timing was, well, to put it kindly, interpretive. Yet Tom was lost in the moment, eyes closed in passionate bliss, blissfully unaware of the sympathetic cringes from the handful of people watching. He finished with a triumphant flourish, a genuine smile plastered on his face. After he stepped down, his colleague Maria, a kind soul who had sung semi-professionally in her youth, approached him gently. "Hey, Tom, that was really brave," she began. "Just a small tip that might help. If you focus on supporting your breath from your diaphragm, you'll get more control over your pitch." Tom just blinked. Diaphragm? Pitch? The words were jargon to him, technical terms from a world he didn't inhabit. He didn't understand what she meant, and because he didn't understand, he dismissed it. "Thanks, Maria, but I think I've got my own style," he said with a tight smile, turning away. Feeling a little deflated by her criticism, Tom scrolled through his phone for a confidence boost. He clicked on a silly online quiz. What's your hidden creative talent? After answering a few vague questions, his result popped up. You possess a great deal of untapped creative potential, and you have a great need for other people to admire you. A shiver went down his spine. It was so accurate, it was almost spooky. The quiz understood his very soul. It was the validation he needed, a profound insight that affirmed his destiny. That evening, as he got ready, he looked at the sequined jacket he had bought especially for the performance. It had cost a small fortune, a shimmering, glorious, and slightly tacky investment in his future stardom. The thought of the money he'd spent, the effort he'd put into choosing it, it made the performance feel even more important. Backing out now wasn't an option. This jacket deserved its moment in the spotlight, and so did he. He wasn't just singing a song, he was justifying the jacket. Just before the show, another co-worker, David, pulled him aside. "Hey man, are you sure about this?" David asked quietly. It's just maybe comedy is more your thing? Tom's face hardened. He couldn't see David's genuine concern. All he could see was jealousy. Wow, Tom said, shaking his head. I guess some people just can't stand to see others succeed. It's sad, really. He saw David's bias perfectly, but remained utterly blind to his own complete lack of musical talent. He walked toward the stage, jacket sparkling, ready for his big moment. So, my friends, that's a very short story about what happened to Tom in the talent show. And now we're back to dissect this anecdote and to learn about some very important cognitive biases from this short story. Oh, Tom, his journey to the talent show stage is a masterclass in the biases of self-perception. It's funny, it's a little painful, and it's deeply, deeply human. Tom isn't a bad person. He's just a person whose brain is working overtime to protect his ego and his sense of self. His story is the perfect launchpad for us to discuss 5 fascinating biases that distort how we see ourselves, our abilities, and our place in the world. These are the biases that live inside our own heads, shaping our confidence, our goals, and our interactions. So let's tune in. Let's start with the Dunning-Kruger effect, the peak of Mount Stupid. Now let's begin with the star of our story, Tom's breathtaking, unwavering overconfidence. This is a textbook example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Named after 2 psychologists who first described it in 1999 study, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, this effect is the tendency for people with low ability or knowledge in a specific domain to overestimate their own competence. It's a fascinating paradox. The skills you need to be good at something are often the very same skills you need to recognize how not good you are. Because Tom lacks musical skill, he also lacks the ability to hear his own off-key notes. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. In their original research, Dunning and Kruger conducted several experiments. In one, they asked participants to rate the funniness of a series of jokes that had previously been rated by a panel of professional comedians. Then they asked the participants to estimate how good their own sense of humor was compared to everyone else. The results were stark. The participants who performed the worst, whose joke ratings were completely out of sync with the experts, were the very same ones who most dramatically overestimated their own ability. They weren't just a little off, they thought their sense of humor was well above average. This happens in all sorts of domains, from logical reasoning to financial literacy. The researchers found the same pattern when they gave participants logic problems. The lowest scorers consistently believed they had performed quite well. This isn't lying or bragging. It's a genuine blind spot caused by a lack of what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. If you don't have the framework to evaluate performance in a certain area, you can't accurately evaluate your own. And there's a popular graph that illustrates this, often referred to as the peak of Mount Stupid. When you first learn a little about something, your confidence shoots up. You feel like you've got it figured out. This is the peak. But as you learn more, you begin to realize the vastness of what you don't know, and your confidence plummets into the valley of despair. Only after a great deal of learning and practice can your confidence begin to climb again, this time founded on actual expertise. Tom was standing proudly, sequins and all, right on top of Mount Stupid. Now, I know what you might be thinking. It's kind of depressing, right? I mean, shouldn't you talk about the same thing you talk about all the time, encourage people to have more confidence and stuff like that? Absolutely. I'm all in for that. I'm not trying to rain on your parade. All I'm trying to do is to be careful not to be overconfident too quickly. Just try to be as honest as possible with yourself with how much you know, and no matter what you're trying to learn, you will have to know that it takes time. I mean, you can't pick up a guitar today and become a professional tomorrow, or after a week, or even after a year. It takes time. You will have to admit that to yourself and keep practicing, keep learning until you have real confidence, not the pseudo confidence standing on the peak of Mount Stupid. All right? So, now we talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect. Let's move on to another bias, which is kind of the opposite. And this one is called the curse of knowledge, when experts can't explain. It's kind of the opposite. It's not exactly the opposite, but let's talk more about it. Now let's go back to the story and turn to our kind, well-meaning colleague Maria. She tried to help Tom, but her advice fell on deaf ears. Why? Because she was afflicted with the curse of knowledge. This is the cognitive bias that occurs when an individual who is an expert in a particular field unwittingly assumes that others have the necessary background to understand them. Once you truly know something, it becomes incredibly difficult to imagine what it's like not to know it. Maria's advice about diaphragmatic support and pitch seemed simple and fundamental to her, but to a complete novice like Tom, it was incomprehensible jargon. Her expertise blinded her to his ignorance. The phrase was first coined by economists in 1989, but one of the most famous experiments demonstrating it was conducted by a psychology doctoral student named Elizabeth Newton in 1990. In her study, she divided participants into two groups, tappers and guessers. The tappers were given a list of very common songs like Happy Birthday and asked to tap out the rhythm on a table. The guessers had to guess the song. Before they began, Newton asked the tappers to predict what percentage of the song the guessers would correctly identify. The tappers confidently predicted a 50% success rate. The actual success rate? Well, less than 3%. Why were the tappers so wildly optimistic? Because as they were tapping, they couldn't not hear the melody in their own heads. The full symphony was playing in their minds, complete with lyrics and instrumentation. They were unable to separate their rich internal experience from the impoverished information the guessers were actually receiving. Just a series of monotone taps. This is the curse of knowledge in its purest form. This bias is a huge challenge for teachers, doctors, engineers, and any expert who needs to communicate with the public. It's why brilliant scientists can be terrible lecturers and why IT professionals sometimes seem to speak another language. They have forgotten what it's like to be a beginner. Overcoming this curse requires a conscious act of empathy, a deliberate effort to put yourself in the shoes of your audience and translate your complex knowledge back into the simple language of a novice. So, that was about the curse of knowledge, our second bias for today. Now let's move on to the third. This is the Forer or Barnum effect, the flattery of vagueness. Next, we'll look at the moment of validation Tom got from his online quiz. The statement, "You possess a great deal of untapped creative potential," struck him as a profound and personal truth. He fell for the Forer effect, also known as the Barnum effect. This is the tendency for individuals to give high accuracy ratings to personality descriptions that are supposedly tailored specifically for them, but are in fact vague and general enough to apply to a wide range of people. It was named after psychologist Bertram Forer, who in 1949 gave his students a personality test. A week later, he gave each student what they believed was a unique personality sketch based on their results. The students were amazed at its accuracy, rating it on average 4.26 out of 5. Well, the secret? Every single student received the exact same sketch, which Forer had pieced together from various newsstand astrology columns. The effect is also named after the famous circus showman P.T. Barnum, who is often credited with the phrase, "There's a sucker born every minute." Barnum knew that the key to appealing to a large audience was to have a little something for everyone. Barnum's statements work because they tap into our deep-seated need for self-validation. We want to believe that we are unique, understood, and have hidden depths. Now let's look at another statement from Forer's original list. You have a great need for other people to like and admire you. I mean, who doesn't that apply to? Or, at times, you have serious doubts as to whether you have made the right decision or done the right thing. This applies to virtually every thinking human being on the planet. The statements are often flattering. They focus on common human anxieties, and they have a balanced two-sided quality. For example, you can be disciplined and controlled on the outside, but you tend to be worrisome and insecure on the inside. Well, my friends, this bias is obviously the engine that powers a multi-billion-dollar industry of horoscopes, fortune tellers, psychics, and online personality quizzes. They make us feel seen and understood by feeding us vague generalities that we ourselves fill in with personal meaning. It's a powerful reminder that when something seems too good or too true to be a perfect description of us, it probably is. So, that's the Forer effect, or the Barnum effect, if you will. And next, let's talk about the IKEA effect, the value of our own sweat. Let's talk about Tom's sequin jacket. Now, this wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was an investment. The money and effort he'd put into it made his performance feel more significant and made it harder for him to back down. This is a perfect, if slightly glittery, example of the IKEA effect. Now, obviously, the IKEA effect is named after the Swedish furniture giant that makes us build our own bookcases. The IKEA effect is the cognitive bias where we place a disproportionately high value on things that we have partially or fully created ourselves. It's not just about ownership, it's about the labor. The effort we invest in something, our sweat equity, inflates its value in our own minds. In a key study by psychologists Michael Norton, Daniel Moshon, and Dan Ariely, participants were divided into two groups. The builders were given a simple IKEA storage box to assemble. The non-builders were just given a pre-assembled identical box to inspect. When asked how much they would be willing to pay for the box, the results were astounding. The non-builders valued the box at an average of 48 cents. The builders, the people who had invested a few minutes of frustrating labor into its creation, valued their own box at an average of 78 cents, a whopping 63% more. Well, this happens because of a deep psychological need called effort justification. Nobody wants to feel like they've wasted their time or effort. So, to avoid that uncomfortable feeling, our brain performs a little trick. It convinces us that the outcome of our effort is more valuable than it actually is. That wobbly bookshelf you built isn't just a wobbly bookshelf, it's a testament to your hard work, a symbol of your achievement. Tom's jacket wasn't just a jacket, it was the physical embodiment of his commitment and his dream. Well, I will have to say that this bias is generally harmless and can be positive sometimes. It's why we enjoy hobbies and feel a sense of pride in our work. But like Tom, it can also make us irrationally committed to our own creations and investments, blinding us to their flaws. And finally, let me talk about the bias blind spot, which is the ultimate irony. And that brings us to the grand finale of Tom's story. When his coworker David tried to give him some friendly advice, Tom didn't reflect on his own ability. Instead, he immediately diagnosed David with a clear case of jealousy. Well, this is the ultimate irony, and it's called the bias blind spot. Well, this is the tendency to recognize the impact of cognitive biases in other people while failing to see the impact of biases on oneself. It is a meta bias, a bias about biases that makes all the other biases we've discussed so much harder to overcome. We are all fantastic at being amateur psychologists when it comes to our friends, family, and colleagues. We can easily spot their confirmation bias, their sunk cost fallacies, their overconfidence. We see their irrationality with perfect clarity. But when it comes to our own minds, we have a stubborn belief that we are objective, rational observers. In an important research about this, psychologist Emily Pronan and her colleagues gave participants descriptions of various common biases. Then they asked them two simple questions. To what extent do you believe you show this tendency? And to what extent do you believe the average American shows this tendency? The results were consistent and profound. On average, people rated themselves as being significantly less biased than their peers. And it is, of course, statistically impossible for everyone to be better than average, right? Now, the blind spot is fueled by what's called naive realism. And this is the intuitive belief that we see the world as it really is, objectively and without bias. Therefore, when other people see the world differently, it must be because they are the ones who are biased, irrational, or misinformed. Tom sees David's jealousy because it's the only explanation that allows him to maintain his own self perception as a talented singer. Admitting his own lack of skill is not an option. Recognizing his own Dunning-Kruger effect is impossible because his biased blind spot is standing guard, protecting his ego. It's the final defense mechanism of a biased brain, and it's one that we all possess, starting from me to everyone who's listening to this episode. We've got to admit that we are affected by cognitive biases as much as the next person. So, these were the biases that I wanted to share with you today. Of course, that's not the end of our week, and that's not the end of the biases we're going to talk about. And there's something special that I'm preparing in the background, but maybe I'd like to give you a sneak peek. Well, it's a series of stories, and these stories are all focusing on the workplace. Because I thought to myself while I was working on this project that, yes, it is important, of course, to learn about cognitive biases, but maybe I should work on something that relates it more to something practical or something that we all care about, the workplace. So I'm working on this series and it will be ready soon. And by the way, for those of you who don't know about English Plus series, it is another podcast that I'm hosting. And in this podcast, you get to listen to the first episode of every single series for free. But of course, to listen to the entire series, you have to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on Patreon. But anyway, I will tell you everything about that in our weekly digest episode. Yeah, I know that we don't usually have a weekly digest episode, but I'm thinking of having one like that every week. And that's after the advice of a very close friend I have. Because whenever she found out something new I create on the website or somewhere else that is not exactly here on the podcast, she would tell me I wouldn't have known about it if you hadn't told me or if I hadn't found it by chance. So you should tell people about these things because they might be interested. And that's exactly what I'll try to do in those weekly digest episodes that we're going to have on Saturdays or Sundays. I'm not sure about that yet. But we'll talk about everything we've done in the same week, what are we going to do the next week, and what's happening on all our other fronts like the website, the other podcasts, like this one I've told you about. Maybe some of you don't even know about it, that we have English Plus series. But anyway, let's continue with our episode. Now that we're done talking about the topic for today, we're going to move to our language focus section. It's coming next. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. I'm afraid this is the end of the free version of this episode. If you want to continue the episode to listen to the language focus section, you can do that by subscribing on Apple Podcasts or on Patreon. You can find the links in the description of the episode. I hope you learned something new, and I hope to see you on the other side. But if that's all you need to know, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you again. Remember, we're going to be talking about cognitive biases the whole week, so there's still a lot to learn. Make sure to come back tomorrow to learn more about cognitive biases. I'll see you then.